Till we're all growing a beard. A man's face should never be bare. We just want some facial hair. We're anticipating, yeah, everyone's waiting for a beard.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're really glad you've chosen to join us today. And for those of you who will catch us later, either here on Facebook or on the podcast apps, we're glad you've chosen to join us. This is Behind the Beards, and we pull the curtain back, take a look behind the scenes, and do our best to reveal the things that you need to know about your ministers and your ministry leaders. My name is Josh Fowler. I am a preaching minister in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My partner, my brother, Aaron Partlow, is a youth minister in Topeka, Kansas. And what's going on, man? Got your coffee going this morning, or is that tea?
Just it's actually just empty. I just drink it so that I look cool. It's a Tonight Show.
That's right, hack, right?
Yeah. What's up with me? What's up with you? I hear there's a new Fowler in the family.
There is. I'm not really sure how Japanese law works, right?
Or is there a new death in the family? But that doesn't sound.
That doesn't sound right. There is a new member. There's a new member of the Fowler family. That's right. My son got married. Today's the 8th. He got married a day and a half ago for us. On the 6th for us, but on the 7th for them in Japan. So,
wow! Congratulations, Dustin.
Thanks, man.
We're excited for you.
They hoping to make a little trip over here to the States in May, so we'll be able to actually meet her face to face. We've met on FaceTime in a lot of different ways. We've had a lot of conversations with her and her family, but that'll be a good chance for us to meet face to face. It's pretty cool.
I am so bad at relaying information to my wife. Last night she was on Instagram and saw it, and she was like, "Did you see?" And I was like, "Yeah." You didn't know? She's like, "No, did you know?" And I was like, "Yes, I did. I think maybe Josh told me that they were getting married sooner rather than later." She was like, "Wow, he's just a baby." And I was like, "He's not a baby. He's in the Marine Corps. He's a man."
Well, and we knew it was going to be quick, right? I mean, they talked about it being really soon. And so by really soon, I'm thinking January or February.
Right.
And then Sunday night, he sends a text and he goes, "So we're getting married today." It's like, okay, well, very cool. I said, "We'll send pictures." And so 5 minutes later, he sends a picture of a form, all in Japanese.
Nice.
I said, "So was the ceremony in Japanese?" He's like, "Not really a ceremony. We just had to go to the courthouse and sign these papers, and we're married." So they're looking forward to a big celebration when they get done and come home in a couple of summers. So
that's exciting. I'm excited for him. Dustin's such a great guy. I love him, and I'm excited. I hope that we'll get to meet her as well in the future. So maybe Absolutely. We'll make our Baton Rouge trip finally.
Right. Well, I would say you've always got a place to stay, but Dustin might take the place. But I'll find you a place to stay.
I used to like Dustin a lot. No, not so much. He's the worst. Well, hey, guys, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We are going to our title today, this morning is "How Are You Doing?" I'm fine. And Josh and I were just talking about one of our favorite Christian comedians whose name slips me. His name is Chris. Do you remember? We were just talking about him.
John Christ.
John Christ, there it is. Wow. Thanks for really letting me float out there for a while.
I couldn't tell if you were about to crack a joke or if you were really looking for help.
No, I was really looking for help. And he always says that fine is the Christian F word, which, because when we're really talking to people, we'll say, "Oh, I'm fine," when really we can be really hurting on the inside. And so Josh and I both stumbled across this article written by the Christian Chronicle. I gave them a holler and I said, "Hey, we are a big time podcast, millions of viewers. And we wanted to review your article on our podcast." And they said, "Well, that would be great. Just make sure to shout us out. And I said, of course, I love the Christian Chronicle. A lot of you subscribe and get to read their articles. And this one was really good. It says ministers struggle under weight of the pandemic stress. Many ministers are stressed and exhausted. The profession may be divine, but it really takes a toll. It's all consuming. A licensed marriage and family therapist in East Texas, Smith said that it's not just her professional opinion, it's her personal. Her husband, Stephen, serves as a youth minister for the Glenwood Church of Christ in Tyler, about 100 miles east of Dallas. And so we just kind of wanted to take some time and kind of chit-chat about this article a little bit. Josh, what are your kind of thoughts? What were your first impression thoughts when I sent you this article?
Yeah, my first thought was, duh.
Right? Yeah, right.
Because the reality is, there you would be hard pressed to find people that aren't affected by the way of life that we're in right now, and the kind of stress that is about. You see it in homes, you see it in jobs, you see it in churches,
right?
You see it in schools. But then I kind of started reading through it, and it kind of really got me to thinking about the unique ways in which I would say ministers and probably service personnel. I think you could put some of the same kind of things with like nurses and teachers.
I think so.
Because it's a very similar kind of interaction with people, with community, and with those that we're called to serve. And so just the unique ways in which that has affected me, some of the ways I think I was aware of, but not really aware of how deeply affected I was until kind of recently when some other folks were talking about some similar things. So I just want to say that right out front is like, look, we're not saying that ministers struggle and nobody else does, because we're aware that so many people are facing a challenging thing. We just want to maybe highlight some of the unique ways in which we are affected, because we have a tendency, we'll talk about this in a little bit, we have a tendency to put our self-care on the back burner. And I think being aware of those things is the first step to making sure we preserve ourselves and our own spiritual health so that we can continue to serve as we're called to. So.
Absolutely. This is not a wine fest over here at Behind the Beards. This is just simple reminding, really, this Josh and I were talking about this in the pre-show, that this podcast was really for this episode today is really for Josh and I, and to remind ourselves about self-care, remind ourselves all these kind of things. What really stuck out to me is I've never been a numbers person. Matter of fact, I can remember going on a high school mission trip, and we have about 35 kids on roster. We had about 40. We had a big graduation class. We have about 35 right now. And I went on a high school mission trip. So at most, I should have had like 20, 22 teenagers, and I had 7 want to go on this high school mission trip. We went on this high school mission trip. It was fantastic. We had a small group. We had some intimate devotionals all week. We were able to do some great service projects, all sorts of stuff. I get back. I'm pumped. The kids were pumped. It was a great trip, spiritual high, serving God. And I remember getting asked, a question. Well, did you feel like it was a good trip? Because only 7 out of 22 teens went. And I went, yeah. It was an amazing trip. It was great. And, it kind of reminds me of that Bible study, or the Bible story in the Old Testament about Gideon, and he shrinks like the army down and down and down and down, except for the other way around. Like, well, do you really feel like it was an effective trip because only 7 went? And I was like, yeah, you talk to any of those 7 who went on that trip, and they're going to tell you that it was a really good, it was an amazing trip, and it was full of bonding and great memories. COVID has made me think about numbers more than anything, and I hate that. I hate that, and it kind of drives me crazy.
It's taken me back to the car business days, right? The hardest thing for me to get out of going into ministry, because in the car business, I had numbers, I had benchmarks, and as long as I was hitting those benchmarks, I knew I was on track. I knew how to gauge growth. I knew how to gauge success. I knew how to gauge progress. And then you get into ministry, and it's like all that stuff you learned and how to gauge progress, it goes out the window. Because
Right.
the most important thing you can do is deal with the people that are in front of you, whether it is 1, 100, or 1,000. You've got to deal with the people in front of you.
Yeah.
And, growth is not defined by numbers, because the growth we're seeking is not something that can really be measured physically like that. We're looking for
Absolutely.
spiritual growth.
Mhm.
And, ultimately, our hope and our prayer is that obviously we want numbers to grow. But
Right.
if the numbers don't grow from a very spiritual standpoint, they're just fluff. Right? I mean, I can get 50 teenagers to show up to anything. Right? And I do that by offering them something for free, or giving them free pizza, or something along those lines.
Right.
And people will show up. People will show up. The difference is, how do we create growth that lasts, that really is an anchoring point that will allow them to endure. And so I agree, man. Getting back in there, it's like, okay, how many people do we have online today? When where it's a worship service, how many people are logged in, and which one of the the analytics, which one of the analytics do I use? Well, I'm using the one that's got the highest number on it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like, well, did you factor in 10-second views? And I said, I don't care. I just want views, because
Yeah.
I'm looking for that, because it gives me some sense of accomplishment. How many people logged in? It's like, well, there was only like 7 by the time I started teaching, but at one point we had like 47. So I'm taking 47.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just so easy to fall into that, because I can't see the other side of the screen. So it's like all of a sudden numbers are the only thing I have to go on. So it's easy to kind of fall into that trap.
What's amazing is, and I got to give props to like churches in general, like, well done. We talked about this earlier, that like churches had to be so quick for this,
fast, yeah.
this dynamic change. Like, there's the largest, this is like a running joke, right? That like churches, like they're slow, and then there's like church slow, right? It's kind of like me. I always make a joke like, oh, it was hot today, but it wasn't nursing home hot, because it's like really hot nursing home. Like churches are slow, and there's things that are slow, and then there's church slow, which is like really, really slow. And a lot of time that's really good. And I'm not making fun of churches, but we're methodical. We have to think about it. Because these are dynamic shifts and dynamic changes. And also, we've seen things in the past where churches have made fast, risky decisions, and they didn't really think about it. But this pandemic has made us like shift and move and change the way that we've always done things so quick. You have churches who are, I thought it was funny. We were putting in a live streaming service at Central, and our stuff was on back order. They said, oh, it's only because every church in America is going to live streaming. So everything is bought up.
Right.
And so like it took us, instead of like getting it, we're going to be live streaming next month. It took us like 3 months just to get the equipment to our church building. It was insane. And so churches have done a great job at making this dynamic move. And at first, it was like, ooh, this is new. This is fun. This is great. Right. I remember like, I was like, ooh, we're going to have Zoom class. What? It's going to be lit. And then now it's like, Zoom class. Like, it's brutal, right?
Fatigue, right?
And so, this is perfect. The pandemic pushed some congregations to do something they had to put off for years, and I think that's really true. And then Bryce's comment, I think that really is why it has been so hard for us. We don't make changes fast, and this has forced us to do something.
It forced us to make initial changes fast, but then it forced us to make subsequent changes, sometimes even faster. And so while a lot of people were really uncomfortable with that first step, the subsequent steps became increasingly more challenging.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden we're in this world that not only, we're accustomed to culture being a place that we don't get and don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
But when now we're at a place where church feels like a place that we don't recognize, that's the anchor. That's the thing that never changes, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's that thing that's always steadfast and it's always there. And I know what to expect when I walk in the doors. And now it's like, man, what's changing this week? And not because it's bad, just because out of necessity.
It makes me kind of think about, like, how does your church thrive? My church thrives in being able to have those conversations, those hugs, those handshakes, those kisses, all those kind of things that kind of happen in that auditorium. And what has COVID really ripped away from our congregation? Well, that,
Right. Before we get there, we can just touch up on here what, Josh Jones, a good friend of mine and yours, right? He's a
terrible picture.
It is a terrible picture, but that's okay.
Looks like a police picture or something.
I don't know. I'm accustomed to getting that little kind of sideways look when you say something off the wall. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just this idea of, initially, just like I was excited, everyone was excited because it was new. And it was something to explore. And, they're looking at it in schools and at work, and here we are in church. And we had this mindset, I think, going in that it was going to be brief, right? 3-4 weeks, 6 weeks at the most, and we're going to be back to normal. But Josh talks about these early days where, people are showing up. And then, later on in the pandemic, you're lucky to get 1 or 2 people who are there, because it's just, it's hard, it's taxing, it's a different way of engaging. And like you mentioned, you don't have that very personal interaction that is so desperately needed. It's how we identify ourselves, right? And it's hard to get to figure out what it is that's going to bring people back, right? He says that it's difficult to figure out what will get people back.
I was gonna say, yeah, I love that part. I connected more with Josh on this quote when he says, teens are tired of being online. It's amazing. This was really hard. And I think some people don't, and I think it's when you don't work or understand and know teens, like, there's a difference between being online, doing schoolwork, doing Zoom calls, and everything like that, and then going home and like playing video games or something like that, right? There's a difference. Sorry,
it's really got to you.
Coffee down the run, yeah. But there's a difference. There's a joke in the gaming community where you have these semi drivers who are like, oh man, just got off a 38-hour drive. I feel good. You know what? I'm going to go home and play some Euro Truck. And Euro Truck is a it's a truck driving simulation game. And there's a disconnect. There's a difference there. And so normally we think teens like, oh, they want to be online all the time anyway. So like Zoom class is just another thing, but it's not. And teens are tired of being online. And I think it really stems back to what I was trying to say earlier was, what makes your church thrive? What makes youth group thrive? Well, what makes youth group thrive is you come into this space and you take your jacket off and you're hanging out with your friends and you're talking and you're playing silly games, and sometimes they're gross, sometimes they're fun. You're moving all over the place. There's like this interaction that you have, but you just can't do that with a pandemic or with the virus. It has to be separate. It has to be, all these different things. And so Josh, he says this is, teens are tired of being online. I said teens are tired of being online, but aren't engaging in person either. And I think that's the part that is tiresome to me. He says it's difficult to figure out what will get people back. He said, admittedly, he's drained.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that drain because, if I can't connect with a team during the week via Instagram or a text or something, at least I know I'll see them on Wednesday, and then I can connect in person. Now that outlet has been taken away. That outlet is gone. And so my job has become increasingly harder to make these relationships and these connections. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just like what Steve, says here, that like for a lot of kids, this
Wow. Yeah.
internet connection is the only connection they have. And a year ago we were talking about how this isn't real connection. We can't, this can't last. We can't go on with this. And I think what we're seeing with this generation who had become so accustomed to connecting online, I don't think they realize how much of an impact that personal connection had until it was gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
even if it's just a small one.
Right. And not just for this generation, I think for our generation, because I think that's something that we knew was there, but we took for granted. Because, we've kind of grown up in this world where we had both. Even, you're not that far behind me here.
Pretty far.
When did you get your first cell phone?
Sophomore year of high school.
Yeah. And I was just married, but I would have been a senior in college when those things really started coming about. It was not a Razor; it would have been a brick phone, but still, it came later in life, right? So we grew up without that technology. You've got a generation of kids that are growing up, and all they've known is technology. But now they're realizing how important that human contact is. And I think as a church, I think we really have taken it for granted. And I like, what Johanna says too, is that, Paul writes that, you see that in his letters, right? I long to see you. I long to come back to you. And I'm already making plans.
Right. Ain't that the truth? Like, man, I used to read that and I used to go, man, Paul just like really enjoyed like hanging out with people. And now like 1 year into this, I'm just like, oh, I don't care what we do at youth group. Like if I long to see those kids and we get to come in and hang out, and like we did a fall retreat at Tallgrass, and man, I had so much fun just because like we were outside, we wore masks, we did everything that we should do, to be safe and to be good. But it was so much fun just because we got to get together and things like that. So that was pretty awesome. But thinking about these numbers and thinking about that, go ahead. You had another comment.
No, I was just going to say, your dad said you go to drive-in church and everybody gets out of their cars and stands up and talks to people. You can't keep people apart when they're there.
Right.
You can keep them safe and you can provide avenues, but there's just a very real realization of how much this has affected people in general.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we move on in this article and we get to this point here, and this is still talking from Josh Jones' perspective. And here we have Summer Lashley, and it says, adding to the stress, Jones attends church alone without his family pre-pandemic. In the university, church attendance ranged from 250 to 300. Now gatherings are limited to 50 because of restrictions. So I'll be honest with you. My wife and I have been struggling with this. Lauren works at the hospital. She gets to a point where, we just had COVID, and we just had to quarantine for like 3 weeks, and it was like really weird. But there is this like, one, she has the biggest fear of passing COVID on to somebody else, and things like that, and so like she comes home, she changes her outfit, she showers, leaves shoes, all that kind of stuff. It's all out somewhere else, or it's in the basement of her house, all that kind of stuff. And her biggest like stress was not going to church and getting COVID, but going to church and passing it on to somebody else. Like what if she was asymptomatic or something like that? And so this was a stress that we never even imagined. Like the idea of me going to church on Sunday morning and Lauren worshiping online. That is a weird feeling. And I have heard more youth ministers who say, well, I go because it's work and I need to go. But their spouse and maybe their children, aren't going. I don't know that if you've experienced that or anything, or if you've heard anybody, but I thought that it was that it's been really weird for me to not be able to worship with my family, like without my wife, without my son. I look forward. Sam loves music. He loves singing, and so it's just been really like, that's a really weird dynamic that I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, we considered it just because of Heather's in nursing school, and so she's in and out of hospitals all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the areas she was working in were not high risk at all.
Mm-hmm.
She's going through mental health and just some basic adult one kind of thing. So that didn't really affect us. But I know, Jonathan, who's probably, watching, his wife is pregnant and she's due pretty soon. So if there's ever any kind of not necessarily even hesitancy, but about being at risk, I know the minister there at Holly Hill, his wife is pregnant as well. And so when you factor in those things, it's like, okay, so now I have to balance my obligation to my church, because I am their minister, and to the people, but also to my family. And that's a really, really challenging, I don't want to say balance, because but it is a balance, I guess, because we do have obligations to both. But what takes precedence, and when does it take precedence?
Absolutely.
And, I don't know. It's just, it's not a choice I would wish on anyone. And I don't think we mentioned it before, but we're talking about these personal connections. The hard thing for a minister is when you talk about how we gauge our ministry,
right?
It all hinges on personal connection.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Every Sunday, I get to the building early. I pray over the things that will go on in the rooms. I leave class a little bit early to make sure I'm in the auditorium, and I walk up and down the aisles and I greet, shake hands, hug, talk to every single person I can before and after services. And now it's just as awkward as, like, do you shake hands? Do you knuckle bump? Or do we just wave? Or do we, how do we greet each other now? Do we nod like the Japanese? Or, what is our greeting? Because you don't want to offend anyone. Mm-hmm. You don't want to put anyone in an awkward situation. And you can do that either way, because the people who are on the ends of the spectrum, we used to be kind of close and I could hold them together really easily. But now you're coming up on people who are on such polarized ends of an understanding or of an expectation of how this should be handled, that my personal connection is no longer a personal connection with you. It's a, how far can my arm stretch to try to hold you two together?
Right.
Yeah. And that's just been the, and you can't do that anymore in a way that we've understood, because the people aren't right there in front of you. You can't look at their faces and read their expressions and their body language. Because not only are you looking at a Zoom screen, you're probably looking at a Zoom screen that's just got an avatar now. Right. Yeah. It has completely changed my understanding of connecting with people. So a little bit of a tangent. Sorry.
So no, you're fine. And so it makes me think, like, and today we want to kind of take a little bit of a corner here and turn a little bit, because we want to talk about ministers and youth ministers and preaching ministers and children's ministers. And what do you do? Like, how do you take care of yourself? And that's what I appreciate about this article, is that it kind of really took a strong turn. And I guess this is the part of the show where we want to tell you, if you are a minister, these are things that we got to practice what we preach. First off, it's a big part of it. But also, like, if you're just a church member, an elder or a deacon, especially if you're an elder, like, your job is to shepherd, and your job is also to help shepherd your ministers as well. And so you need to remind them to do this. And even if you are an elder, you need to remind yourself to do this. And so they take this turn, and they talk about, like, this getting outside and spending time with God. I think now, I remember the first time in college that I left my phone, my watch, my every clock kind of thing that I had, and I got my longboard and I went out for a ride, and I got lost, and I sat somewhere, and I meditated. It was the first time that I'd ever like tried to really take like alone quiet time with God. I'm sorry, my former youth minister. You know, you know, quiet time really never worked for me in the mornings. It just wasn't something that I could get into. Also, all of my teens, if you watch this, stop. But yeah, like we got to get outside and we got to take that time for God. Shared 5 reasons he believes ministers like Stephen are quitting. They are weary, cut off from nurturing relationships, refereeing a political war, grieving over lost members, and worried about church finances. If you really think about it, all of these things are such a burden that ministers have to worry about all the time. You know what, like a hardest conversation to be sitting in is when you're sitting in the room and somebody goes, well, we didn't make budget this week. Oh, we didn't make budget this month. And you're sitting there and you're like, am I going to be compensated? Am I going to get paid? You know, what are you saying? Are you saying like
what's the real thing behind this?
Yeah,
right?
you know, and so, and then there's, like you said, like you're trying to hold people together, and especially with a political season in the middle of COVID. So you've got people who, not only do you have people who say, hey, you need to wear a mask all the time. And then you have other people who sit next to you who are going, it's all a conspiracy, you know, and you're trying to keep those people together. You've got Democrats and Republicans, you know, and people who bleed red, white, and blue, and all that kind of stuff. And you're trying to hold all these people together.
And by the way, and they have all the time in the world, not all the time in the world, but they have a lot more free time than they've ever had before to research.
Yeah, to research. Yeah. And then at the same time, like we're dealing with, you know, are our numbers down? What does this look like? You know, hey, we're doing online, we're doing Zoom. And you just have all of this, that's this stress that just kind of builds up. And it's really important for us they need to focus on the spirituality, re-anchoring and nurturing relationships, and work on emotional security and self-care. Like, are we taking those times? Are we taking those moments for self-care? It's crazy. Yeah. What do you think, Josh? I mean, what do you do for self-care? Let me call you out.
Yeah, you are calling me out because this is kind of the crazy thing is I tell you what I do for self-care. I stand on a sideline and have a coach scream in my ear for every call that he thinks I missed.
Right.
And I stand behind.
Is that every Sunday morning or is it? Oh no, you're talking about football. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm talking about football. I'm not talking about church on Sunday, right? I have to find those moments, you know, right, where I just get away and allow that to just let my mind break. Mm-hmm. And it's working, but it's working in a different form, in a different field, in a different fashion. I mean, that's good for momentary stuff. But the thing is, that doesn't last, because as soon as we get off the field on Friday, we go eat, we come home, I wake up on Saturday morning, and I'm processing all the things that I could do better. It's like, all right, I'm ready for the next one. Mm-hmm. And there's already this need for more. We need something that is deeper, right?
Right. We
need something that is deeper and more anchoring. Football doesn't anchor me. Football is a break. It's a relief. Okay. And that's what was really convicting to me about this is here is Mike Cope and Randy Harris saying, look, I know I'm talking to ministers. But I'm telling you, you got to spend time with God. You preach it, you teach it, you proclaim right, it day after day after day after day. You got to do it. And I'm like, what do you mean? No, you're right.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
that quote from Randy Harris is so like, it's such a moment where you're like, yeah.
And I'm going to read it. He says, I know you're busy, but you've got to trust me. For 10 minutes a day, you need to sit and dwell in the presence of God. And then Mike Cope says, and he's telling that to people who already know that, but they forget. And when he tells that to ministers, they nod and they tear up because they're reminded of how much they need that time with God.
Oh, it's so. And I have sat there in a Randy Harris class. I've had that conversation with Randy, and he has said something like so stupidly plain that just cuts through everything. And you're like, yeah.
Yeah. And I like this from my wife too. You know, she reminds me that, you know, sometimes you just have to do what needs to be done. And you know what I didn't have time to do yesterday? I did not have time to drive to Giddings, Texas to pick up a car for a friend.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have time to sit still in traffic for an hour and a half outside of Orange, Texas. I didn't have time to try to get across the Chafalaya Basin Bridge. 15 hours was gone yesterday, but I spent it with one of my good friends, one of our fellow ministers here. And in the conversation we had and the time that we spent, he's getting ready. He left for England this morning. So he also had much more to do yesterday than drive to Texas to pick up a vehicle. But the moments we had in the car, listening to some Facebook, you know, messages, scriptural, talking to people and talking to one another, we've got to be able to take that time to recenter. Get outside, get in the moment, put things away, and really anchor yourself in the presence of God.
Yeah, I love what you said because it connected perfectly. Like, that self-care alone won't erase stress. More than ever, church leaders need support from church members. We'd love to see the church take some ownership, be compassionate, pray for ministers. I beg people to cut them some slack, Cope says. Ministers didn't get into this work to undermine people. They did it for the sake of the gospel. First off, wow, that last part hit me really hard. You know, ministers didn't get into this job to undermine people. They did it for the sake of the gospel. I didn't get into youth ministry to have petty conversations or to get angry over such silly little like church, how we do things at church, right? My wife is so good at reminding me this. And, you know, I got into youth ministry because I wanted to minister to teenagers. You know, I wanted to be a youth minister. I wanted to get into ministry. I wanted to minister to teenagers. I wanted to be somebody who was there in their lives. I wanted to be that foundation block that said, hey, look at me as I look at Jesus, follow Christ. You know, this is the answer that you're looking for. You know, that's why I wanted to get into ministry. And a lot of times I need that reminder. And taking those 10 minutes with God reminds me that, like I've said, is that I've got to practice what I preach. And so, you know, I'm going to commit to 10 minutes every day. I'm going to get my, after I finish my morning coffee, I'm going to go to my basement. Like I did back in college. I'll leave my cell phone, watch, and everything upstairs, and I will go and sit in prayer and personal study in that basement, disconnected from all technology, to have that personal time with God. Because I think I need it for sure, and I don't know about our viewers. I would guess that you need it too.
Yeah, and you know, you said something we were talking
I did.
a few episodes back. Yeah, you said a lot of things. You said one thing that was really poignant, right? And I said, I need someone to come and check on me from time to time. I need somebody to ask me, you know, hey, how's your wife? How you doing? And you said, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't need anyone to ask me. I need someone to walk up and tell me, go take care of this and do it now. Because if you ask me, what am I going to say?
I'm fine.
Right? I'm fine. So I need people that aren't going to ask me, but that are going to demand my accountability in this. And if they recognize that there's something not there, and I need it to be someone that's not named my wife, right?
Right.
Because, you know, they're always there. They're always about those things. And I'm about to go do something. It's like, you know, you really don't have time for this. It's like, yeah, no, but it's cool. And they're not really going to argue, even though they know what's best for us. But we need those people in our lives that are more objective, who can come along and say, we can't afford for you to go down this road in this way.
Yeah.
I want you to take this time, and I want you to go. And when you come back to the office tomorrow, everything's still going to be here. Nothing's going to be touched. You're not going to be fired. All the stuff you have to do today is going to be there tomorrow. Today, here's what I need you to go do. Because, I mean, that's in the moment where you look and you go, yeah, that you get done with it. And it's like, that was really, really crucial. I really needed that. I didn't even realize how much. So.
Absolutely. This made me think of that TikTok song. And this is a good way to close, but have you heard it? Sometimes Lauren will ask me and I'll be like, hey, how you doing? I'm doing just fine. I lied. I'm dying inside. Hey, how you doing? I'm doing just fine. I lied. I'm dying inside. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, that's such a catchy and really sad song.
Yeah. And true.
And it's true. And sometimes that's how people are feeling. Josh, any closing remarks for us?
Man, I just say, hey, if you're a minister, take care of yourself. Don't make someone come up and force you to do what you should be doing because you've been teaching and preaching for people to do it all along. Right. Be the kind of minister, the kind of leader, the kind of teacher that recognizes that in yourself. If you're at a church and you recognize that, instead of saying, man, you look tired, to your minister, walk up to him and say, I want you to do something for me. This afternoon, I want you to go take a break because you've been working your tail off. And we want you to be here for the long haul. And we recognize it, but we've got to be willing to stand behind it for ourselves and for the people around us. That's my moment, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for being here today. We want to thank you for just hanging out with us, loving on us, and being here. It means a lot to us, and we hope that it means something to you. But we want to remind you of something that's super important to us, which is Galatians 6:9, which is do not grow weary in doing good things. And boy, does that really fit this episode and this season that we're in right now, is to just not grow weary in doing good things. And good things is praising your ministers, slapping them on the back and saying, hey, I appreciate you. And that also is a big part of just life in general. So don't grow weary in doing good things because this world is messy. There's a lot of hate. There's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of unwarranted criticism that kind of goes out. So do something good. Do something good in Christ's name and give that glory to God. And that'll be so different and so needed in this world. I'm Aaron, and this is Josh, and we will see you next week on Behind the Beards.
Till we're all growing a beard. A man's face should never be bare. We just want some facial hair. We're anticipating, yeah, everyone's waiting for a beard.